telling us we're missing a lot out on the hadith, and it's important for us to follow our religion, and that then there is, if it comes from the Prophet and therefore it's binding upon us, I would like to cite to him in the Quran when Musa has got revelation from God about sacrificing a yellow cow. This is clear. This is God's words. Qat'i. We do not need witnesses. God has said it. It's proof. Musa received revelation for his people. He ordered his people to sacrifice. What's wrong?
The second rebuttals is 10 minutes, 10 minutes.
Yes, after this one. This is my first rebuttal.
Oh, wait, yeah, sorry, my bad.
Can we start?
Sorry about that.
It's all good. Allah yatik al-afi. It's all good, bro. Okay. A lot on the hadith, and if it is now going to be 100% traced back to the Prophet, it has to be binding. But I would like to present the idea that was presented to us in the Quran. Qat'i. There's no conjecture here. It's the word of God, where Musa was getting revelation from God to sacrifice a yellow cow. This is binding upon their people because the messenger's ordering them to something. But does that now, because it's got recorded that now Jews, every time someone gets unalived unrightly, that they have to go sacrifice a yellow cow? No, this is revelation based upon their people, that is specific to their people, that can be written down and can be repeated 100 times that the Prophet said so. It does not mean that it's binding, because the Quran is telling you that it's sufficient and complete for your guidance, and therefore there is no other judge outside of the Quran, and the Prophet was ordered to judge by the Quran. So by the standards of the Quran, their whole concept of the hadith being valid is quickly dispelled. Now, we got the two conditions that he told me, the true trustworthy of report. But in hadith, they have 4 conditions, I believe, or even 5 conditions. It's things like the hadith cannot be shadh, queer, or it cannot be weird. But we have many hadith where it is queer. And we have also the defects, the hadith cannot have illa for it to be authentic. But then we have hadith that is contradicting to the Quran, and yet they are accepting it because they do what my good brother here did many times. They just give you a narration and then it has to be accepted. For example, he's saying that we got all the hypocrites. This is not something that they can empirically prove, because hypocrisy is something that's internal, it's not external. Now, the pagans are not narrating religion. When he's telling me about the Europeans and on the pagans narrating, this is about history and events of history, and it does not become now religious binding, because when it comes down to religion, I'll present to you again the children of Israel. They were given manna and salwa, manna and quails, the best available thing for them, and then they started to complain. They wanted the lesser quality, and God has punished them for doing so. And this is what we see with the people who want to narrate and follow this hadith books. God has given you something that is empirical, that is certain, that there is no doubt in, which is the Quran, and they rather run to something that is little like a lot less quality, and try to keep comparing it to the Quran, which my opponent currently did many times. He keeps comparing to how the Quran is being approached in the same way that we can do that with hadith as well. And this is where they're falling into what God has explained to us about the children of Israel. Now again, we're talking about religion, not historical concepts, because in history it does not necessitate that trustworthiness means accuracy. Here we're talking about religion. You want to be 100% accurate with what's being said. Now, appealing to the hadith as Roman history, this is something, he mentioned Al-Zuhri, which I addressed. Al-Zuhri is also known to be a politician at the time. He was paid by the courts. He was a Umayyad, for example. He's from the Umayyads, and he just keeps mentioning to me about history and history. Now, connectivity and trustworthy, 1 or 2 falsehoods means that nothing is certain. We have a hadith, for example, Abu Hurairah saying that if a woman walks by you, that your salah is now wrong, that you can't do it. And then Aisha is defending that position, saying no, that's not true, because the Prophet used to pray in front of me, and that she's accusing Abu Hurairah to keep making his own things up. And in that hadith, and Abu Hurairah says, you're too busy with your makeup, I was the best friend of the Prophet, when he only stayed with the Prophet for 3 years. So no, just because there's connectivity, it does not prove trustworthiness. Abu Hurairah was admonished by Aisha, as I showed to you, and this is just an appeal to authority again. Now, there's the reliability of probability. This is what they're trying to explain expressed to us that because even there is probability, like, just giving the meaning, not being verbatim, that there is some corroborations, but we don't know exactly what's being said, then we fall into the problem of dhann, conjecture, which my opponent has to concede to that point. There is conjecture in hadith, which God tells you that the majority of them are following conjecture, and this is an admonishment. This is not something that is acceptable when it comes down to religious standard. Now, for example, if a chain is gold, it's a gold chain, they start to assume that everything is being said is true. While they say to us, oh, if you find a defect, it doesn't mean that the whole hadith is wrong. It's not about finding defects. It's about the Quran not giving us the authority to go use it as religious guidance. If you want to look at history, you want to see these corroborations and what people are saying, fine. You want to see a certain way of applying the Quran, as long as it's aligning with the Quran, fine. But is it necessary for religion? Absolutely not. Now, is the criteria of authenticity sufficient for history? Is his question. So this is what he's asking me. Can we actually trace it back to the Prophet? You have to demonstrate it for all your mutawatir, which you can't, because you don't know the number of mutawatir hadith. This is debatable. It's not something that is certain, but we know how long the Quran is and the verses of the Quran, and there is no debate there. Now, the preservation of the Quran is based on reading. Okay, it's still the same source, and people are reading it differently and making mistakes, but the source is preserved. Here we're still talking about the evolution of the corpus, and I'm not saying that Albani changed the system. Albani started to modify if this is sahih and this is wrong. He's trying to apply the system in a different way based on his subjective takes. We see this because there's a book by Hassan Farhan al-Maliki in regards to one hadith, which it says about Muawiyah, that he is the pharaoh of the community of the blessed. Every community has a pharaoh, and Muawiyah is the pharaoh of my community. This was supposed to be a sahih hadith early before the Abbasids, and of course the people who followed Muawiyah doesn't like this hadith, and then it got degraded to a weak hadith and they rejected it. But there's much cooperation, and there's many people that can witness to you that Muawiyah was admonished constantly by the Prophet, that Prophet did not like Muawiyah, and this is the Shia hold. And then now we get into the problem where it's political again. It's got nothing to do with religion, and they just use the Prophet as a means to give you that authority, the appeal of authority. Okay, the Quran is the statements of the messenger. So if I want to know what the Prophet قال, okay, إنه لقول رسول كريم, it is the statements of an honorable messenger. So I do not need to find statements outside of the Quran if this is the message that the messenger gave me. The rejection of hadith is because of God telling us to do so. This is where the verses that I presented were not addressed, because they cannot address them, because they want to go back to how it applied 1400 years ago, and they don't see the Quran as a living book, how it applies to them today. It's being talked, the Quran is in Arabic, warning the Arabic person. He's not warning the Western person, because it is a book that is so clear and they don't use it. And the Quran itself, which you could say circular reasoning, but then you're not a Muslim, it's saying to you that the people are taking the Quran forsaken, in which we see this. And this is what Umar bin Khattab, according to their narration, feared. And they've made it happen by recording these books. Now, the Western academics talking about the common link, the majority of them don't tell you it goes back to the Prophet. In their methods, it goes back to Umar bin Khattab, it goes this, and then now we have to presuppose, because of you, that these people are trustworthy. These are the key links, these common links. And how many hadiths do actually, by the common link, Matsky's definition, go back to the Prophet? But you see, the thing is, by the Uthman period, when you're talking about the fitna, the Quran was already in a complete corpus. We were capable of opening the Quran and seeing what was written in it, and it cannot be modified, it cannot be sahih, da'if. People read it differently, understandable, but the source itself is preserved. But we do not see the same with hadith. Uthman did not sit and codify no hadith books for you, and at the same time the fitna occurred, but then the problems, it did not happen right next day. It worked, it required 5 to 10 years for this political uprising, for people to go head to head in regards to Muawiyah and Ali and the Kharijites and everything. And then it became catch the Kharijite, which brings me back to the Ikramah problem. Ikramah. And I'm sure my opponent knows this issue very well. There's a narrator who narrated many hadith in Bukhari. And one of the key elements, which I was telling you, the rigorous test, is the man cannot be a sectarian. He has to be from Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah for the Sunnis to accept him. Of course, there's the different standards for the Shi'i, because hadith depends on the sectarians, but we don't have that with the Quran. Now, Ikramah, there's many reports saying that he was not a trustworthy person, that he was actually pushing Kharijite